Shehechiano viki mano hikiano las man hase. Okay. So, the Worlds of Bashevis, what I'm going to do is to talk about one of his probably not very, probably unknown novels that was serialized in the forwards. Der Mann von Chaloimis, The Man of Dreams. And I will start my talk now. And if you should interrupt if there's something you don't understand or anything that is unclear while I'm talking. Like many Yiddish works, The Man of Dreams is hidden in the Jewish Historical Press Archive. It belongs to the vast corpus of Yiddish works that require archaeological unearthing in the form of scholarly study and translation. Just a fraction of this corpus has been made available in the universal medium of the book. To fully delineate the variety of Bashevis' Yiddish work, The Man of Dreams can provide some of the missing links of his works in the forwards, which haven't been made available in English book translations, which to this day remain only the tip of the iceberg of his bilingual oeuvre. Der Mann von Chaloimis der Erzählung, The Man of Dreams, A Story, which was the title when it was published in the forwards, was serialized in the forwards in 1970 and 71. And that is very unusual, a first-person confessional memoir by a 76-year Frankist who in 1886 is recalling his youth and adulthood in Warsaw. The work provides a fascinating example of Singer's literary self-fashioning as a proto-Frankist. And this is a quote from the book, from the work. I was not a Christian and not a Jew, but a Frankist, and the fall of the sect was my downfall, unquote. And it's very important that it takes place in the 1880s because, as Ronny Schmero points out in an article about this work, it is no coincidence that the memoirs are described as written in the 80s. In the 80s, there was renewed public interest in the Frankists in Warsaw, and doubts were expressed about the sincerity of their conversion and the completeness of their absorption into Polish society. The historian Paweł Maszetko, I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly, who is the expert on the Sabbatatvian Frank movement, characterizes these two Singer's two Frank novels that were serialized in 1935 and in 1970 this way. Less known than Satan in Gorai are Singer's two novels drawing upon the exploits of Jacob Frank and his followers, Der Sündiger Meshiach, the Sinning Messiah, from 1935, and Der Mann von Chaloimis, that I'm going to talk about today. While the former is merely a not very successful fabulation of historical scholarship, the latter is a very interesting take on the Frankist milieu of 19th century Warsaw. Okay, to the novel. The protagonist of A Man of Dreams mixes storytelling about his adventurous life with philosophical and theological reflections. Growing up in a religious Jewish home in a shtetl near Lublin, typical Singer, his given name is Tuvia Yechachmel Alter Ben Zion. Tuvia's life trajectory consists of some of the options available to a modernizing Jew in the early 19th century who left the traditional shtetl. After a short period as a maskil, Tuvia marries into a Protestant family, converts to their denomination of Christianity, and changes his name to Peter Robinson. After meeting Mstislav Majewski, you have to correct me with the leader of the Roman Catholic Frankists in Warsaw, Peter Robinson converts to Catholicism and becomes Adam Stanislav Kodecki. which is the family name of the Polish noblewoman he marries. In the 1830s, the Frankist movement is in rapid decline, and only a small remnant remains with whom Kodecki can practice as a Frankist. And the protagonist introduces himself in the first paragraph of the novel. And I'm going to show you the manuscript from the Harry Ransom Center. This is just from the Jewish Historical Press. You can find you know how to do that. This is the manuscript that I found. Yitzhak Bashevis, der Mann von Chaloimis, Kapitel 1, Freitag, September 11. And you can see it's a very relatively clear copy. Most of the manuscripts in the archive are very clear copies. And I assume that this is kind of the final rewriting of he's probably already two or three other drafts. And this is the final draft, the final version that is submitted to the newspaper. And he gives instructions that this is going to run on Friday. And you can also see marks from the Setzer, the printer at the newspaper, in different colors, that this is the serial version for that particular day. Okay, if you follow in the text, you want to follow here, or do you want to follow in the English? This is basically my English translation. Last night, I read the Confessions of Jacques Rousseau until dawn. As I read this work, I kept thinking that I ought to do the same. Tell the story of my life without embellishments, without a rampart and without falsehood, as the Talmud articulates it, from Ketubot 17a. Only give the whole truth. I thought about writing my work in Hebrew, but I don't have the aptitude to use the holy language. Moreover, I don't want to pollute the holy words with descriptions of my actions. I have therefore decided to write in Polish. Anyhow, nobody from my generation will read the book. I will put it in my safe in the bank, and I will state in my testament that it must not be open for 100 years. If the bank is still a bank, the safe is still a safe, and the mites haven't eaten the paper. In fact, I write for myself to forget the sorrows. Anyhow, everything rots and is transformed into dust. God's broom removes everything and everybody. Okay. So what's interesting is that this is supposedly written in Polish, which is not a new thing. Singer didn't invent that. There's another famous example of that, which is Sholem Asch, who wrote Der Mann von Nazaret, also a monologue about which is also supposedly written in Polish, right? So this is the same approach here. Okay.
And the titles even rhyme.
What?
The titles rhyme.
Yeah, the title rhyme, exactly. So the narrator's horizon, as here, spans wide. I mean, Rousseau, his Confession, Polish literature, and the Talmud. And he's writing for himself to forget his sorrows, and that clicks, of course. That is related to Glickel, Hammel's, which is also, interestingly enough, written after her husband's death, to forget her sorrow during the long nights, as Glickel says in her memoirs. And that is also in the family's possession for over 200 years before it was published in the late 19th century. So it's it's clearly Singer makes a connection to that. Similarly, and then he uses this bank metaphor. And you can see maybe that is an example of I don't know, he might, think about the monetary value of this manuscript in the future. The novel exemplifies the dissimilarity of a writer whose cultural and literary origins in pre-Holocaust Poland are superseded by an entirely different cultural context in post-war America. For the readers of the foreword, Singer's work was aesthetically intelligible and enjoyable, but most rejected it on ideological grounds, as a throwback to religious obscurantism, which they viewed as reversing more than 100 years of emancipation spearheaded by socialist Yiddish newspapers such as the Forwards. In the novel, Singer employs a pre-modern aesthetic and ideological matrix originating in a religious universe, textual universe, cyclical rather than progressively forward-looking, to plunge the depths of the human condition by tapping the hidden tradition of Sabbatai Tzvi and Janke Frank. So this novel was actually serialized in 1970 and 71, and it was sandwiched between Sonim a Geschichte von Liebe, which was serialized in 1966 and appeared in English translation as Enemy is a Love Story in 1972. And I can tell you a very exciting thing. The original Yiddish serialized version that has been put together by somebody, I don't remember the name. Well, what? Who?
Valentina Fedchenko.
Okay, wonderful.
Of Enemies, right?
Yeah, Enemies. That would be published by a Swedish publisher, an Orleanski Verlag, which is one of my former students, who has a little Yiddish publishing house in Lund, and it will come out in June. The Yiddish version of Sonne mag Geschichte von Liebe.
5 lovers instead of 3.
What?
5 lovers.
Yeah, 5 lovers instead of 3 lovers. Exactly. It's very different from the original, from the English version. It's going to be interesting to compare these two. So, like Enemies, The Man of Dreams, Frankism is the ideology of choice for a person who permanently shifts his identity and lives a life of sexual promiscuity involved simultaneously with several women. Like Enemies protagonist Hermann Broder Kodecki, or Baruch Levi, as he calls himself when he meets the Makover Rebbe, we will get to that later, characterizes himself as a charlatan who fools. He uses the word obnaren, as you know from Gimbal Tam, who fools the women he meets through performative role plays and disguise. At the beginning of World War II, from September to December 1939, Singer published a series of 4 long articles in the Vorwärts under his pseudonym Yitzchok Warszawski, Isaac from Warsaw, about Vielweiberei. Have you heard that word? Vielweiberei, polygamy. These articles attest to the ongoing interest in Vielweiberei as a way of grounding the literary theme as elaborated in his Sevi and Sabbatai Tzvi and Frank novels in events derived from Jewish cultural history. The titles of these articles indicate the chikave, the very spicy, the quality of Warszawski's journalistic writing in Vorwärts. An editorial note stated in Vorwärts, December 10th, 1939. And you can see that here, it's coming up. Last Sunday, we printed an article by our contributor, Yitzchok Warszawski, about Rabbi Gershom's ban, which is a ban that was issued 1,000 years ago to outlaw the Jews. A Jew had more than one wife. As a result, all the Jews in the European countries where polygamy also was forbidden for the non-Jewish population followed the ban. But in the countries where the general population still practiced polygamy, the polygamy among Jews were not abolished. This article addresses such countries. And then I'll read you these Chikave title of these articles. This is serious articles, I mean long articles, not just, these are 2,000-3,000 word articles. He did research for them. So the first one from September 39, right after the start of World War I. A country where Jews were forbidden to wear pants and where a rabbinical scholar was a blacksmith with 3 wives. The second one from December, when and why was Rabbi Gesham's ban enacted with a Jew, that a Jew could not have more than 1 wife? The next one, backward countries where men to this day have more than 1 wife, the life and customs in these countries. And the final one, which you'll get a kick out of, Mormons, a polygamous American sect that sees its members as chosen and persecuted people. So he was very preoccupied with this theme, obviously, at this time. So back to the novel. Kodecki navigates seamlessly between various religious, linguistic, and social worlds, spanning the Polish nobility and the Hasidic ultra-Orthodox world. Kodecki discovers unexpectedly that he also has healing abilities and starts a successful practice as a healer. Like Hermann Broda, Kodecki establishes 2 households without knowledge of one another. As Kodecki, he is a Catholic convert living with his wife Teresa and her daughter Helenka in a fashionable part of Warsaw. He is also Baruch Levin, the husband of Dvoirele, who he marries after the death of her father, the Markova Rebbe. He installs her in an apartment in Praga, a neighborhood just outside Warsaw. Dvoirele gives birth to their son Josele, who grows up as a religious Jew. Kodecki shuttles back and forth between these 2 households, telling his 2 wives that he is traveling salesman in Russia. Quote, here I was a Jew in Praga and here a Gentile in Warsaw. My soul is split in 2, I must lead 2 lives. Okay, so this is very similar to Enemies, right? He's also involved with Jente, his Jewish childhood love, who has converted to Catholicism and taken the name Eve, and with Eliza, the wife of the leading Frankist in Warsaw. Very active love life, you have to say. So the Tuvia Stanislav Baruch split identity and multiple disguises enables Singer to address the potential for freedom and self-invention in the United States. Singer's journalistic articles and fiction in the forwards were addressed to a readership which similarly was split between 2 worlds, the pre-war Jewish Poland and post-war American. Although the novel is set in the Polish-Jewish past, it belongs to Singer's American oeuvre. American freedom and self-invention are exemplified by the narrator's continuous border crossings and multiple identities situated in a historical Polish-Jewish universe of clearly demarcated boundaries. The narrative fluid identity enables him to move seamlessly between separate and often incompatible religious, linguistic, and social spheres, which provides a rich array of comical and farcical situations, like in Enemies. He is unable to sustain any kind of conventional family life or relationships with his children. After his wife Teresa's death, he even starts a sexual relationship with his stepdaughter Helenka until she elopes with a Russian officer. So, in contrast to Hermann Broda in Enemies, who is a ghostwriter for the American Rabbi Lambert, Kodecki is a healer who makes a living by laying on of hands. Prior to his new profession as a healer, Kodecki conducts seances with Eliza. They are depicted as acts of cynical trickery, preying on old people who have experienced the recent deaths of close relatives, similarly depicted in Singer's stories, The Seance, from 1968. And I found this very interesting. This is, by the way, Yitzhak Warshawski, Abgestandene Länder, wo Männer haben noch bis heint zu etliche Weiber das dortige Leben und dortige Minhagim. So this is one of these articles I mentioned. You can see this is a serious, long article he put a lot of work into them. And these are the titles that I read from Warshawski. And this is the piece I found in the archive in the file under Der Mann von Chaloimis. And he wanted apparently he translated this little excerpt from the novel about a seance. And you can read it here. I don't want to use the time to read it, but you can see he might have had an intention to actually publish this in translation. Okay. In the final part of the work, Kodecki and Eve leave Poland on a journey to Paris and London. Kodecki experiences leaving Poland and the Yiddish language as forced exile. Kodecki's Dream Theater's shifting identity is tied to Mameluschen. Quote, one can be a priest on Sunday, a rabbi on Monday, a thief on Tuesday, and Wednesday an opera singer, everything in Yiddish because only one's own language can set the tongue free. In England, Kodecki feels disconnected from his spiritual roots. The English language, quote, seemed to him like a faraway legend which had no connection to me and my soul whatsoever. Okay, so there's another main theme of Singer's work, another world of Singer, and that's the necromancy that appears in many of his work. The work's description of the necromancy of Betty, a psychic who Kodecki meets in London, leads to a new direction in his life. Betty has both a foot in the world of the living and the dead. The love of her life, Fievel, died prematurely and visits her frequently together with their dead children in the woods. Betty is endowed with psychic abilities to predict the future and to communicate with the dead. Singer combined his early preoccupation with ghosts and dibbuks in Soddenengoai und andere Erzählungen with a vision of the ghost-like Holocaust survivors on the Upper West Side in the cafeteria. Similarly, the Man of Dreams is informed by loss, death, and trauma, from which the free agent Kodecki only momentarily escapes through sexual adventures and psychic epiphanies. Okay, this is the first part of my talk. How am I doing with time? Let's see here. Oh, okay, I'm doing fine. Okay. A month after the completion of this novel, Singer immediately, and this is amazing, I mean, he was so incredibly prolific. He wrote one novel after the other in addition to all the journalism, and as you well know. 1 month after the completion of this novel, Singer began to serialize the semi-autobiographical Der vertriebene Sohn, a roman, The Banished Son, a novel, which appeared Friday and Saturday in the Forwards. This work starts when the 19-year protagonist model on the young Singer leaves his rabbinical family in a small Galician shtetl and moves to Warsaw in 1923. The epigram is a quote from Talmud Brachot 3b, woe to the father who has banished his children, and woe to the children who have been banished from their father's table. And you know, this is the title of Alan Mintz's Zichron Livracha's book about Hebrew autobiography. The epigram highlights the loss of faith as the central theme of The Banished Son. As Ronny Schmero points out, Bashevis views the origins of what he calls the polygamous Werther from Goethe. In his youthful dreams about writing a novel, he gives the title Der Heiratschwindler, the Marriage Swindler. In one section of the novel, the young Singer is staying with his older brother, the Yiddish writer I.J. Singer, and his family outside Warsaw, and decides to buy paper and ink to start writing The Marriage Swindler. But he soon realizes that he lacks the sexual experiences to go through with the idea. In the same segment, Singer sketches the outline of The Marriage Swindler, which he hopes will make him famous and be translated into Polish and English. After rejecting the idea to turn his brother, or the Yiddish writers Peretz Markish and Melech Ravitz, into the protagonists of the novel, he remembers a story about a Jew from the Polish town Bilgoraj, where his singer's maternal grandfather served as a rabbi in Bilgoraj until he died in 1915. The Bilgoraj Jew stole the dowries of 20 and 30 women that he defrauded while secretly being a polygamist. Rejecting the idea of turning his protagonist into a thief and a polygamist, Singer gives this self-portrait of himself as a young, unpublished writer. And this is an interesting self-portrait. I quote, and you can read it here. He must love women and at the same time hate them like Schopenhauer, Nietzsche, Tolstoy, and myself. Somewhere I had an aversion to the big-breasted, broad-hipped creatures, Bashevis, who always capitulated to their enemies, never resisted, and were always ready to take on the culture of the victor, his languages, his gods. In my time, they became the carriers of assimilation. My sister-in-law had prevailed in demanding that Josele, I.J. Singer, and her son should speak Polish, not Yiddish. In the following episode, I.J. Singer returns home to the family worn down after a day's work as Yiddish journalist in Warsaw. I.J. Singer, who used to believe in the social ideal of Jewish manual labor, has become a Yiddish journalist, the worst possible castle in the sky profession. Die samme ärgste Luftparnasse. This episode exemplifies the gender division in I.J. Singer's family of castle in the sky men and assimilating women portrayed as female Bashevis creatures whose bovine bodies sexually overpower the emasculated, effeminate men. In the 1960s, Singer turned his youthful idea for a novel about a polygamist Werther into a farce in Enemies and in The Man of Dreams, but that both were published almost 50 years after the day he describes in The Banished Son in 1923. So, I'm going to get to the misogyny, don't worry, I'll get there. Okay.
Precedes you in it.
Early in his literary career, Bashevis and his close friend Aaron Zeitlin, Yiddish and Hebrew poet, collaborated on a Schund-Roman about the philosopher Otto Weininger, the author of Sex and Character, from 1903. That novel, mentioned in Singer's memoirs, was never published. Weininger's misogynist ideas influenced the young Singer, as indicated in the passage quoted above. In Singer's post-war work, such as Der Mann von Chaleumis, a variety of female characters are depicted in relationship to the quintessential male singer protagonist, an effeminate man with a powerful sex drive, a kind of phallic Jew. Singer surrounded his polygamist Werther with a selection of female types that recurred throughout his work: the religiously devout wife Dwoirele, the Polish Schickse, Teresa, the female version of Kodecki, the Frankish nymphomaniac, Jente, Eve, and Eliza, and the mystic with supernatural powers, Betty. That's the selection. But this contradictory sexual ideal is not only applied to male characters in Singer's oeuvre. At least one novel that I've studied, which came out in English as Meshuggah. In Yiddish, it was serialized as Verlorene Neshomis, Lost Souls, features a young woman with multiple male lovers, including the male narrator of the novel, who lives out her dream of promiscuity. Both male and female characters are enthralled to the Frankist belief of free sex, which they obsessively seek to realize while cynically manipulating their lovers. This is also the case of Eve in The Man of Dreams, who abruptly abandons Kodecki while they are in London and becomes the lover of a wealthy American Jew. Kodecki, like Hermann Broder, manipulates and instrumentalizes his multiple lovers in order to maintain his harem. Okay. In Singer's Yiddish works, particularly the ones that he decided to leave untranslated in the archive of the Forwards, he felt less inhibited to give expression to his anti-feminism and misogyny. During the second wave feminism in the US in the 60s and 70s, Singer toned down or obliterated such overt misogyny from his English work in order not to offend his growing American and international readership. So that's also an interesting thing about translation and revising. Because Singer's rise to fame in America was made possible through English translation, he began to prioritize what he called the second originals. In English, Singer continued to publish prolifically in the Forwards, while supervising the translation of an increasing number of his serialized work into English. However, only in Yiddish did Singer experience that his tongue was set free to create and reach his particular readership, who, like him, had grown up in pre-Holocaust Eastern Europe. Okay. In a piece published in the Forwards and under the pseudonym Yitzchak Warshawski, Singer equated the Yiddish writer with a ghost. And this was actually published in that special issue of the Pakenträger that Aaron Lansky mentioned yesterday. It's a very interesting. Wie fühlt sich ein jiddischer Schreiber in Amerika? I once said that a Yiddish writer is like a ghost who can see but is not seen. Perhaps that is why I like to write ghost stories. The Yiddish writer not only belongs to a minority, but he is a minority in a minority. He's a paradox to his own people. Theoretically, a Yiddish writer is dead. He moves around like one of my phantoms, a corpse, who either ignores his own death or is not yet aware of it. So you can see the necromancy in Der Mann von Chaloimes and other works of Singer as a metaphor of the Yiddish writer's creative process of communing with his dead people. It exemplifies the literary imagination's power to keep the historical memory alive of the Polish Jewish people's voices, longings, and dreams. In the Man of Dreams, Singer creates a self-portrait as a Frankist. Quote from the novel, "A one-of-a-kind, a person with his own distorted existence, a kind of spiritual cripple, a combination lock that has been spun around so many times that it doesn't work. An übergedreht Schlüssel." Okay. And then I think it's interesting. By reaching the Yiddish reader, Singer is momentarily able to unlock the door of the spiritual prison of his protagonist, Kodecki. And then there's a very interesting quote from the late Jonathan Sacks, which I think fits really nicely here. Oh, why? Okay. Okay, it's not there. Okay. I'll read it to you then. It's fine. There is a fascinating passage in the Talmud describing an event in the 3rd century that tells of a certain rabbi who had the power of healing. Brachot 5b. When he laid his hand on someone who was ill, he was cured. Then, continues the Talmud, he fell ill himself and set someone to fetch another rabbi to heal him. Why, asked the Talmud, did he not cure himself? It answers, a prisoner cannot release himself from prison. It takes someone else to turn the key that unlocks the door. Read any story of transformation and you will find a significant other, unquote. Singer's prolific output, published at a breathtaking pace well into old age, is in both the Yiddish press and book form, was driven by a need to keep his mother tongue alive by reaching a readership, a significant other, which struggled just as he did with the split identity of being exiled in a foreign land. In the late 1960s, the Daily Forwards reached 70,000 to 80,000 readers, And this readership was attuned to the newspaper's serialized fiction. As a regular contributor to the newspaper, Singer was in constant touch with a community of readers who were knowledgeable about Eastern European Jewish history and culture. The Yiddish readers commented on Singer's work in letters and in person at the cafeterias, which served as gathering places for the Yiddish diaspora in New York. As a regular guest at these cafeterias, Singer developed a subgenre of his novels and short stories, featuring himself as a semi-autobiographical narrator who serves as the confessor for his readers whom he meets. Edward Said's theory of late style is useful for an understanding of the particular condition and character of Singer's bilingual work in post-war New York. Quote from Said. There is therefore an inherent tension in late style that abjures mere bourgeois aging and that insists on the increasing sense of apartness and exile and anachronism, which late style expresses and, more importantly, uses to formally sustain itself. As an exile in New York, Singer belonged to a community of Yiddish readers and writers disconnected from the mainstream of American culture. America figures only peripherally as a setting for the Polish Jewish refugees and immigrants and enemies that takes place in the late 1940s, or as a faraway destination for Eve's sudden departure from Europe in Der Mann von Chaloimis. Yiddish writings in the post-war period exemplify the late style of a literature that anachronistically engages with issues from Eastern European Jewish past removed from contemporary American realities. Inhabiting a supra-historical realm of storytelling, Singer continued to address eternal truths and maintain his pre-war belief in the separation of literature and politics. Then the final section of the paper, and I think I should have time to quickly go through that. So the protagonist of Der Mann von Chaloimis, I would argue, is paradigmatic of the Jew as a pariah. Hannah Arendt, who coined the term, points out that compensating the lack of full emancipation of Jews as Jews to the ranks of humanity, Jewish writers in the age of emancipation achieved liberty and popularity by the sheer force of the imagination. And there's a reference to Heinrich Heine, who talks about the Schlemiel and the Lord of Dreams, Traumweltherrscher. So Singer exemplified this kind of Jewish emancipatory strategy, which he articulates through his Man of Dreams, for whom, quote, the dream is our private theater where we play out our longings, our fears, our illusions. A striking example of Singer's use of Frankism as a vehicle for his protagonist's fluid identity and cross-communal disguises can be found in a section in the middle of The Man of Dreams. On his way back to his wife in Warsaw after a visit with his lover Eva in Lublin, he is forced to stop in a shtetl named Markov because part of his sleigh has broken. Kodecki seeks out the town's Jewish holy man, the Markover Rebbe. He joins the Rebbe's congregation and pretends that he is a traveling Jewish salesman. When confronted by the Rebbe's Hasidim, Kodecki reveals his knowledge of the Talmud, a Talmud tractate which he recites by heart and is invited by the Rebbe to his private study. Kodecki engages in a theological debate with the Markover Rebbe, whose traditional Jewish belief greatly impresses him. When the Rebbe's daughter, Dvoirele, enters the study, he falls in love with her pure innocence and Jewish modesty. After leaving the Rebbe, he reflects about his own strange behavior and infatuation with Dvoirele. Quote, My own behavior baffled me. Why would a convert to Christianity step into a study house, recite the Kaddish, and in addition play tricks on a holy Jew? Did I become a penitent? And well, what was the sense behind my present drunkenness? She is a forthright daughter of Israel. Women like her throw themselves into the fire to avoid breaking a rule of the Shulchan Aruch, unquote. After the Rebbe's death, Kodeki marries and have a child with de Voirele while continuing his lifestyle as a convert to Catholicism and being a proto-Frankist. This kind of imaginary dream theater is what sets Singer apart as a Yiddish and Jewish American writer. Deeply steeped in Jewish learning and Hasidism, Singer used Frankism as a literary strategy and spiritual paradigm. Only in Yiddish could Singer predict his multifaceted, fluid identities in its full historical range for his primary readership at the Vorwärts. With this readership, he shared life trajectories, languages, and experiences of having journeyed from the Polish shtetl to the post-Holocaust American metropolis. Kodeki subverts the religious and sexual norms of the separate communities that he inhabits, while transiting through and beyond them. Like his creator, he is a trickster and a performer, a Jewish boundary crosser who skillfully navigates incompatible realities. Thank you.